Hey, what's up guys? In this video we're going to be testing all of the best custom installed radar detectors currently available in the market here in 2019. Now, as you guys know, custom installed detectors are different than windshield mounts that put a box somewhere up on your windshield. In this case, the radar detector is mounted somewhere in your grille, and then you have a little controller and display in your cabin, and it leads to a much cleaner and OEM looking install in your car. Now, there's a whole bunch of them that are available at different price points and different features, and I pretty much gathered up all the top ones, put them all in my car at the same time, and went out to go do a bunch of testing. Now, permanently installed in my car, I've got the Radenso RCM, the Escort Max CI 360, the NetRadar DSP, as well as the Stinger VIP. Now, I talk about these detectors all the time, so I know a lot of you guys are familiar with them. Now, the new contestants that we brought in, first off, we've got the K40 RL360Di. This is K40's top of the line custom install detector. Now, K40, it's not particularly popular with enthusiasts, but it's pretty popular if you go out to an installer and ask them for a radar detector. In this video, I want to take a look at how its performance compares to everything else that's available. There's also the Whistler Pro 3700, which is a really inexpensive radar detector. It retails for about $350. And then if you want to add the rear antenna to get directional information, that's only another $100. So you're looking at $450 for a complete front and rear package. Now, that detector, it's based off the CR93. So it's not Whistler's newest platform like the CR97 that has better sensitivity. It's now a little bit older, the CR93. So that's kind of the remote version of it. And then finally, I also went out with the Adaptive TPX. This is a motorcycle-specific radar detector. Now, I'm not a motorcycle rider. I'm not a good person to actually go out and review it, but since I was going out and doing some long-range testing anyways, I figured I'd toss this in alongside everything else and go out and test it for you guys. Now, to mount these all on my car, originally I was planning on just shoving them all in my grille. One of the reasons that I picked the Audi Q5 is that it's got these awesome horizontal grille slats where I can just stuff in different radar detectors and laser jammers for testing. Unfortunately, they don't fit quite right, especially the K40, which is pretty big and bulky, and so we had to build a custom mount to secure all the different radar detector antennas. And a big shout out to Me Is My Name, who the morning of testing went out to go get the parts and build this mount. Speaking of which, I had to wake up really early on the day of testing because the K40 had arrived the day before, and it turns out there's no plugs on the end of the radar detector. The CPU itself is also mostly just empty wires. Now, this is great for professional installation because it makes it easier to run the cables, but it's a little bit more work for me because I have to go and actually, make all the connections manually and crimp the connections. I couldn't just plug it in like with the other radar detectors. And so it took a little bit more work, but got it up and running and we were good to go for test day. Now, inside the cabin, I ran all of the different remote alert LEDs. We've got everything from the NetRadar DSP, the Escort Max CI 360, the K40's LEDs, both the front and the rear. The Whistler has its big display, and then the Adaptive TPX finally over on the right. Now, a quick note about the Adaptive TPX. I went into more detail about this on my website where I go over all the test results and everything. I'll link to that in the video description. But in short, I'm not going to be able to use any of the results from the testing with the TPX, unfortunately. Long story short, they sent me a prototype version of the detector that's tuned for BSM filtering, but it's not really optimized for radar detector. It's more of a development unit. Now, when I heard about this originally, I asked them if they could send me a retail version that's got production level performance and features and everything. So they sent one of those too, but I accidentally grabbed the wrong detector on test day without realizing it, and I didn't realize that until I got home. And I saw all sorts of weird things where performance was not really where hopefully it would be. And also I was seeing things where like a lot of times I would drive right up to the radar car and the external LED would not even go off at all. I could go look at the detector was alerting, but the alert LED would maybe sometimes go off, but other times it would not, even though I would go in and check to make sure the cables are good. So long story short, I went out to go test with it. I can't use it. That kind of sucks, but some of the guys in New Zealand tested with it and they found the performance was really not that great. They ran it against a lot of the usual suspects like the R3, the Redline EX, Radenso Pro M, V1, DFR7 even, etc. And they found it performed lower than all of those. It even performed worse than a Cobra on 34/7. And so it's got a lot of really cool motorcycle specific features, which I think are pretty useful for you guys who ride, but from the testing I've seen, it hasn't been that great, and I wanted to go out and test it myself, and I saw some things that actually looked promising, but unfortunately I don't have any good data to share with you. I do for all the other detectors, which I want to go ahead and dive into next, but unfortunately I can't share any good TPX stuff with you guys the way that I was hoping, so yeah. Anyway, moving on to the good stuff, let's dive back into the testing. So as far as the test course, it's the same Red Barn test course that I've tested with many different times. It's about a half-mile stretch from the radar gun back to the Red Barn. Now, as far as the radar guns, we tested with everything from the MPH B3 on 33.8, the Stalker 2 for 34.7, the Decatur Genesis 2 for $35,500, and then because we had some extra time at the end of the day, I also plugged in the K-band antenna into the Genesis 2, so we were able to do some K-band testing as well. So now diving into the testing, first started off with 33.8. Now before I commit to doing a whole bunch of testing, I like to do a couple different test runs with different detectors, kind of the more sensitive ones and the less sensitive ones, and see just kind of how things are looking on the course. And so I did some runs with the Maxi-I 360, and I found that one actually did really well. As you can see, it had one crazy long detection almost a mile away, and then it lost the signal, and then it reacquired around the 3,300 foot mark or so, which is actually pretty similar to what we've seen in previous tests. The Whistler and the K40, and also the Adaptive TPX that I tested, but I'm not going to show those results, those ones alerted shortly after the barn, so even those detectors actually did pretty well as well. Now, after I saw this, I wanted to change some stuff up to make things a little bit more challenging for the detectors, to show a little bit more separation and to show a couple different things. And so what I did is I actually reoriented the position of the radar gun. Originally, I had things set up to where the radar gun's antenna was transmitting not only a little bit over to the left where the cars were driving by, but also over to the right, kind of downrange down the course. And so what I did was I drove a little bit farther forward to where there was some brush and some power poles ahead of me actually kind of blocking the signal. And when I did that, it actually prevented some of the signal from traveling downrange. And I started to see some more differences between the detectors when I did this. If you take a look at the results now, you'll see that all of the detection ranges will start to drop. I can show it visually to make it a little bit easier, but you'll see there's going to be kind of different tiers of detectors here. So you'll notice, for example, the NetRadar DSP, the Escort Maxi-I 360, and the Radenso RCM all did very well. They were all alerting shortly after the red barn. Now, a little bit farther down the course, I was getting alerts from the Whistler, the Stinger VIP, surprisingly, and the K40. Now, with these last three detectors, I only had a chance to do one run per detector because, unfortunately, while I was testing, my battery died that was powering the radar guns, and so it just kind of abruptly ended my 33.8 testing. And with the Stinger, it should be performing better, and I would think if I gave it a couple more chances and it had a chance to do all three runs, it would do better, but this is what I saw with one run there. If you take a look at the average of all the runs with all the detectors, you can see there's kind of two different alert points. Some of the more sensitive ones alert farther away. The less sensitive ones don't alert until I get a little bit closer to the signal, and the signal gets stronger. Next, let's go ahead and move over to 34.7. Now, testing on 34.7, I saw some similar stuff, and here, let's go ahead and take a look at the chart and run through the results. On 34.7, the best performing detectors were the Uniden R7, which I brought out just to kind of run as comparison to the others, as well as the Escort Maxi-I 360. These two detectors were able to alert just after the red barn every single run. Some of the other high-end detectors were also able to alert there sometimes, but other times didn't alert until I got a little bit closer. You'll see this applies to the NetRadar DSP, the Radenso RCM, as well as the Stinger VIP. With the Stinger, I only ran 2 runs. I think I lost count and forgot to give it a 3rd run. But as you can see, just like the other top tier detectors, it is also able to give really long range detections. Now, this is different than the Whistler and the K40, both of which weren't able to alert until I got closer to the radar gun. We'll go ahead and switch over now to the average test results. And something that's kind of surprising here is the K40 actually performed worse than the Whistler. Now, what's weird is this is a $2,000 K40 system. The Whistler retails for about $350, or if you had the rear antenna, $450. So it's about a quarter of the price of the K40, and yet in this situation, it's actually giving you better performance, which is crazy. Now, the performance in this situation, it wasn't necessarily bad, but I mean, it's kind of weird considering K40 offers a performance guarantee on their website about how the detectors are supposed to be the best performing radar detectors on the market. Next, moving on to 35.5. 35.5 traditionally is pretty difficult for radar detectors to detect, and yeah, we definitely saw this here as well. Now, looking at the charts here, you can see we've got some variety of results. Both the Uniden R3 and the NetRadar DSP were each able to both once give really long detections around the red barn or so, around the 2,400 foot mark. The other 2 runs were right there in line with all the other top tier detectors. And then again, like before, we see range drops both from the Whistler as well as from the K40. Now, luckily for the K40, in this situation, it actually performed a little bit better than the Whistler. We can switch over now to the average test results, and you'll see the Whistler, its average is around 650 feet or so. Now, on this particular course, the kill zone, where the police officer is able to acquire the speed of the moving vehicle, is only at about 400 feet away, which means the Whistler only provides a couple seconds of warning to give you enough time to pretty much slam on the brakes and slow down to avoid the speeding ticket. The K40 gave a couple extra seconds more. Now, this is different than the top tier detectors, which even in this more challenging situation still gave plenty of warning. We're not talking 10 miles of warning or anything because, again, this is a more difficult situation, but they're still giving plenty of advanced warning even in the more difficult situations, which is what I'm finding to be one of the biggest differences between the upper tier detectors and kind of the mid to lower tier detectors. Now, another quick test that I want to point out that I did during 35.5 was the Stinger VIP. It's mounted behind a removable fog light panel on my car. Now, when I was here a couple weeks ago testing the windshield mounts, I also did a run with the Stinger with the panel on and off to see how much of a difference it makes to performance, and it didn't actually make any difference, which was cool to see. Now, I repeated this test this time on 35.5, and the results here were pretty similar. As you can see here, with the panel removed, the results were maybe a little bit more variable than they were with the panel covering the antenna, but otherwise they were right there all in the same point. Now, finally, let's move on to K-band. We weren't actually planning on running K-band, but because it's actually quicker to test remotes than it is windshield mounts, just because you're not having to constantly switch detectors on and off the windshield, you just change power cables. Plus the fact that, well, our 33.8 testing ended a little bit ahead of schedule. We had a little bit of extra time at the end of the day to run K-band. Now, testing K-band is kind of difficult. I'd love to devote an entire day to testing just K-band because there's so many different options as far as settings and filtering options, etc. Plus, there's different K-band guns with different style antennas and whatnot. But for this test, we had a little bit of time, so I wanted to do some K-band testing. Now, the way that I tested here is I tested the detectors with the settings that I normally run day to day, and then I also backed off some of the filters to up the performance somewhat and tested those settings as well. Now, if you take a look at the results, you'll see the top two performers on K-band were the Stinger VIP and the Radenso RCM. Let's take a look at the Stinger first. Now, the Stinger, this is kind of cool because when I was testing on 35.5, I put the panel back over the antenna because I thought that was the last frequency we were going to test on. And when I tested on K-band, I forgot to take it back off. And so we actually tested with the panel on, and yet it actually still beat all the other detectors. Now, Stinger had released a firmware update literally the morning of the test. It was firmware version 4.6.00. Now, I was updating the detector literally on the drive over to the test course. And then once I took a look at the detector, I noticed Stinger had added a lot of new options. They renamed a lot of the filtering options. A lot of times when they update detectors, they change the way the filters work. So all of that, plus combined with the fact that I don't actually run the Stinger that much day to day, so I'm not super familiar with the optimal filtering options, I just kind of set it to a more sensitive filtering option. And I noticed this because I could pick up Honda and Acura BSM falses hundreds of feet away. Like the max alert distance. Maybe that black car way up there. So in the real world, I'd probably want to run a more aggressive filtering option, but testing with these options, it definitely did really well. And this was similar to the Radenso RCM running in highway mode for full sensitivity, plus disabling the traffic sensor rejection filter. Now, when I started enabling some of the filters, things like auto city mode and maybe reducing the K-band sensitivity a little bit, plus setting the traffic sensor rejection to high to get the Honda and Acura falsing, I did see the range drop down a little bit, which makes total sense when you start enabling some filters, or maybe more importantly, backing down the sensitivity of the detector a little bit. Otherwise, in this situation, if you take a look, most all the detectors alert in the exact same area, which is just classic terrain-limited results, where even though there's differences in sensitivities between the detectors, it's one of those things where you just come around a bend and all of a sudden, boom, the signal gets really strong and a lot of the detectors alert in the exact same spot, even though there's some variances in sensitivities between detector.
Not bad.
Yeah. Now, you'll notice with the Uniden R7, when I switched it into city mode, the performance dropped considerably, which makes total sense because that's a very heavy filter. It drops K-band sensitivity to something like 10 or 20% or so. Otherwise, on K-band in this particular situation, all the detectors actually did pretty well, which was great to see. So as you can see, taking a look at all the results here, we definitely have a variety of results depending on the situation, depending on what radar gun is being used, all sorts of different factors, right? And kind of the main takeaway that I'm getting here from this test is the fact that the high-end detectors are going to consistently do well. They're going to give you good detection range not only in the easy situations, but also in the more challenging situations. This is different than some of the mid to low-end detectors, which may definitely do well in some of the easier situations, but if you wind up in a more challenging situation, that's where the detectors are really going to struggle, and you're much more likely to get a ticket. And that right there is one of the biggest reasons why I personally like to run the higher end detectors. It gives me the protection and the confidence that I'm really looking for across the board, both in the easy situations as well as in the tougher ones. Now, when it comes to the higher end detectors, the biggest differences that I find actually using them day to day are not so much performance. As you can see, when it comes to range, they all do really well. The biggest differences actually come down to things like price, what features are available, things like MRCD or auto lockouts, Bluetooth, etc. It's things like the interface, how easy it is to use in practice, as well as the BSM filtering. These four things are kind of the biggest differences that I notice, and I actually want to do a video kind of now that this test is done, it's kind of like doing a comparison between all the best custom installed radar detectors. So that's going to be something that I'd like to do as well. Now, as far as the other detectors, like the K40, I know it's really popular amongst installers, but it's not really all that popular among enthusiasts, and this is one of the biggest reasons why. Now, these results are not actually that surprising. You see, I did another test here on the same course a couple years ago. I tested with the K40 RLS2, which is a windshield mount, which is based on the exact same platform as the remote mount RL360Di. I'd also tested with the Whistler CR85, which has the same performance as the remote Pro 3700. Now, the results in that test were actually pretty similar. What I saw in the last test is there were times where the detectors were able to run close to some of the other maybe mid-tier detectors or so. However, in other times, there were times where it was getting really close to the kill zone and pretty much just trading shots back and forth with the cheap Cobra. Thinking about that and then looking back over at the now remote mount testing, the results make total sense because I'm really seeing the same thing all over again. It's just in a different package, but same sensitivity, so same results. Now, the K40 itself, I like that it doesn't have a display, so if you're looking for a maybe a really stealthy install, you've got just a front and rear alert LED and maybe a remote control, so it keeps a pretty clean looking install in your car, but the performance is just not where I would want it, and I think there's so many other better options that are available for similar, if not less money, that I just don't really find a good reason to recommend or myself run the K40. Now, as far as the Whistler, it also doesn't perform like a top tier detector, but at least its price point is reflective of that. To be fair, it's also missing some other features, like it's got GPS for, low speed muting and red light camera alerts, but there's no GPS lockouts, the BSM filtering is not going to be as good as the others, and of course the range just doesn't compete with the top tier detectors. But considering how inexpensive it is, it's $350 for the radar detector, and the accessories like the rear antenna are $100, they're really inexpensive as well. If you want a custom install detector, but you don't want to spend the cash for a top tier detector, if you're willing to maybe do the install yourself to save some money, that could be an option, even though the performance and a lot of the features aren't really there. The Whistler is going to be much more of a basic and simple option. Anyway, that's kind of how things look as far as this test. A big thanks to everybody who helped me with the testing, companies sending over equipment so I'm able to go out and do this test. Other than that, yeah, I plan on doing another video as far as comparing these top tier detectors in more detail. And then this particular test was done last weekend, whereas this weekend I'm going out to test all the top laser jammers, and I've got a whole bunch of different laser guns to test against. So if you're not subscribed, definitely make sure you subscribe because that's going to be coming out soon as well. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys found this helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.